I think that what we have to really focus everybody's attention on is what is it that they want to see for their future. Oftentimes when you talk about elections and campaigns, we talk about them from the perspective of the candidates and who they are as individuals, etc. But the truth of the matter is these elections are really a reflection of you and what's important to you, what your values are, what future you want to have for your community, for your family. And so when you really dig deeper, people have to ask themselves, what is it that we want for our community and our society? And I think right now we are in a moment, because it's certainly a moment for all of this to have occurred, for us to get to this point where she is at the top of the ticket, meaning Vice President Harris. We're in a moment where people are realizing what this is really about. And it's not about petty politics. It's really about America, and the America that you want to live in and raise your family in and have a future in. And I think a lot of people are, concerned about the alternative. So that's, I think, very galvanizing, but on the opposite side, just as galvanizing is that fear of other. Yeah. And there's a fear of what's going to happen to my advantage or what's going to happen to me if these other folks are able to gain positions of power, etc. So we're in a really tough spot right now, but I believe that we're going to power through this. We've been through many tough spots in our country. This is not the worst we've seen. And I think it's like a pendulum. You just keep swinging. And so you just have to, bear through it, do your part. And when somebody asks you, what were you doing during this historic presidential run? You shouldn't be saying, I was sitting on my hands or I was being a spectator. You ought to be talking about who you were organizing, what doors you were knocking, what calls you were making. I've charged people with the responsibility to bring 4 new voters to the table. Think about how powerful that could be if everybody just brought 4 more new voters out and actually got them to vote. I was part of the room of people at the DNC that gave Secretary Clinton a standing ovation and wouldn't sit down. And we wouldn't stop clapping. And the reason was that standing ovation represented something. It was an acknowledgement that she put 66 million cracks in that glass ceiling. So there was an acknowledgement of thanks for having prepped us for a time such as this. And then, of course, also a grateful, just a sense of gratitude to her willingness to be in this moment and do her part in it. So sometimes you're not going to be the one who crosses the finish line, and you've got to be the one to pass the baton to the next person. And the fact that she and President Clinton were 2 of the first people to come out front and center to support Vice President Harris, I think is very telling about her understanding of the importance of this moment. And it's not about any one individual, it's about preserving our democracy at its very core. We have someone who is seeking this seat who does not even believe in the peaceful transfer of power, someone who may not uphold our democratic system. That's not I remember growing up and saying, oh, what's the, peaceful transfer of power? Of course, what else would you do? It's America. These are not discussions that I ever imagined having as a reality of something that's been threatened right before our eyes. And with January 6th, it was. And some will tell you it was, that's okay or acceptable. And the fact that we are blurring these lines really draws attention to the fact that we're at a moment in time that is so critical that people are putting aside some of the prejudice they might have regarding women. Not everybody's putting it to aside, but there are some that are doing it. We need to make sure more do that. And putting aside personality preferences and, all the things we judge people about, and saying, that's not what this is about. It's about protecting our democracy, having a future for our families that we actually don't have to be afraid of and really can lean into, because the future should always be brighter than the present. And I think she represents that. I think, this moment, you had the sitting president of the United States, the sitting president of the United States say, because of the importance of this race, I am willing to put my personal ambition aside in this moment and elevate a new voice if that new voice can help us to preserve our democracy. Absolutely saving democracy without question. And as I mentioned, some of those other issues, healthcare and the economy, I mean, you've got to create an America where people can sustain themselves. And we've got to have a place that is welcoming for all people. And what we've seen happening in this backlash after George Floyd was murdered, and you have all of this progress that was being made around equity and seems to be now a backlash against that. And it's like, okay, how do we tear down DEI? How do we, reverse course on so many things that were, part of what we assumed would always be there. And our fundamental rights, access to freedom from a variety of sorts. I mean, Texas, for example, is one of the most dangerous places you can be if you're pregnant, because if something were to happen during that pregnancy and you need to have an abortion to save your life, that's an emergency situation. That's not something that the Supreme Court has protected here in Texas. And so we are in a very dangerous place when it comes to our rights being stripped away, but also just access to some of the fundamental progress that we've made. Affirmative action has been overturned, and now they're using that as a means to overturning other ways that we've supported equity throughout our community. So I would say democracy, I would say our economy for everyone to thrive, and then I'd say healthcare for each person and whatever that looks like for them, making sure that we have that protected as well. I would just say to them, this is a time where you've got to get informed and get involved. And this is not a moment where you should ever be thinking that the way you respond to an imperfect system is to make it worse. And part of making it worse means you're not participating in it. And so we've got some fixing of our system to do so that it's more and better representative of the community that it seeks to serve. And part of that means you've got to voice your concerns and then make sure that you use your vote as your voice, not you have a seat, that's not a voice. That means you've muted your voice. And so participating in the politics of today is important. I know a lot of the younger generation does not like a party label. You don't have to do a party label or anything. You literally just vote for what you want to see in your community. So you've got to get educated on that. And just like you look at everything else, you can get educated on this and what's at stake and what kind of healthcare you want to have access to. Who's talking about entrepreneurs and small business owners, and who's talking about making access to education easier for you versus more difficult? Who is going to create a society that creates more opportunity for you is the question you really need to be asking yourself, where you want to have a family and where do you think that this should land in terms of your politics, and that's who you select. And I think if they do their research, they will find the answer is overwhelmingly clear who that candidate should be, and that is Vice President Kamala Harris.